The quiet challenge at studio lights were warm and steady, casting a soft glow over the room. The cameras were already rolling, and the quiet hum of the microphones filled the silence between breaths. Joe Rogan leaned forward in his chair, his eyes locked on the man sitting across from him. It was Keanu Reeves, the actor so many admired for his humility, kindness, and strength. People expected another calm, reflective conversation. But Joe had something else in mind that night. Joe cleared his throat and asked, almost in a teasing tone, "Keanu, people say you're the nicest guy in Hollywood, but can you handle a real challenge? What if I push you out of your comfort zone right now?" The room fell silent. The audience watching the live stream leaned closer to their screens. It was unusual for Joe to set up a guest like this, and even more unusual for him to throw down a challenge without warning. Keanu didn't move at first. His hands rested calmly on his knees, his posture relaxed but strong. He looked at Joe with steady eyes, and for a moment, it seemed like he would refuse. Instead, he gave a small smile and said softly, "Life has been one long challenge, Joe. I'm ready for another." The crowd erupted in excitement, sensing that something rare was about to unfold. Joe leaned back, surprised by the answer. He expected hesitation, maybe even a laugh, but Keanu's tone was serious. "All right then," Joe said, tapping the table. "Let's make it simple. Tell me about a time you wanted to give up, a time you thought you couldn't take another. Step forward, and don't hold back. People watching right now want the truth, not the Hollywood version." The request hit deeper than anyone expected. Keanu's face grew still, his eyes searching the floor as if pulling memories from the shadows of his past. He took a long breath, and his voice trembled slightly when he began. "There were moments when I felt like the world had turned its back on me. I lost people I loved. I walked through grief like it was endless night. I remember waking up one morning and not wanting to move at all. I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe I have nothing left to give." The studio was silent. Joe didn't interrupt. Viewers in the chat stopped joking and began sending messages of respect. Keanu's words were not just an answer. They were a doorway into pain, resilience, and survival. He continued, "But then I remembered something my mother told me when I was young. She said, kindness is not weakness. It is strength, hidden in plain sight. I decided that if I couldn't find hope for myself, I would try to bring it to someone else. That thought pulled me out of bed, even when I didn't want to move. That choice saved me more than once." Joe leaned forward again, his tone softer now. "So you're saying the way you survived was by giving to others, even when you had nothing?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Yes, because when you lift someone else, even a little, you feel lifted too. It doesn't erase the pain, but it gives the pain meaning. And when pain has meaning, it doesn't crush you the same way." The words sank into the hearts of everyone listening. The energy in the room had shifted. This wasn't a casual podcast anymore. It had turned into a moment of raw truth, one that no script could have written. Joe looked almost humbled, his usual playful energy replaced by silence. After a long pause, he said, "Keanu, I didn't expect that answer. I thought you'd tell a story about training, or maybe about a tough movie role. But you went straight to the deepest part of life." Keanu gave a faint smile, his voice steady now. "Joe, you asked for truth. Truth is rarely glamorous. It is quiet, heavy, and it teaches us more than any spotlight ever could." The chat flooded with thousands of messages. "Respect. This is powerful. I needed to hear this today." The moment was already going viral. Clips were being shared, hashtags were rising, and people across the world were whispering about how a simple challenge had turned into one of the most emotional conversations ever caught on camera. But what no one knew was that this was only the beginning. Joe had more questions. Keanu had more truths. And before the night ended, the conversation would take a turn. No one expected one that would test not only Keanu's resilience, but Joe's own understanding of humility and strength. Deeper than the together silence that followed Keanu's words was heavier than the sound of applause. Joe Rogan, usually quick with questions or jokes, sat still for a moment, almost as if he was afraid to break the fragile truth that had just been shared. The cameras caught his thoughtful expression, and viewers online could feel something changing inside him. Joe leaned in, his voice lower now, stripped of its usual showman's energy. Keanu, I've had fighters, scientists, comedians, and politicians sitting in that chair. I've heard stories of pain, struggle, and success. But when you talk about your losses, it feels different. It feels like you're letting us see the wound, not just the scar. Why do you think people connect so strongly with you when you open up like this? Keanu took a breath, his shoulders rising slowly, before he spoke. Because people don't need perfection, Joe. They need honesty. We live in a world where everyone hides behind filters and masks, trying to show their best version all the time. But when you show the broken pieces, people recognize themselves in you. They see their own struggle in your words, and it reminds them they are not alone. The chat exploded again with words like exactly. This is real, and so true. Somewhere across the globe, people sat in their bedrooms, offices, and kitchens, feeling seen by a man they had only known as an action star. Joe nodded slowly. You know, I once thought strength was about dominance, about being the biggest guy in the room or winning the hardest fight. But listening to you, it sounds like strength is about something else. What do you think strength really is? Keanu's eyes softened. He looked down at the table, almost as if searching for the right words. Strength, he said, is not in the noise. It is in the silence after the storm. It's when you choose kindness, even when anger is easier. It's when you get up after grief, not because you want to, but because someone out there still needs you. Real strength is invisible most of the time, but it shows up in the choices no one else sees. The audience watching could feel the weight of his words. Joe tilted his head, and for the first time, he looked vulnerable himself. You know, he said, that actually hits me harder than I expected. I've been through dark times too, and sometimes I wonder if talking about them would make me weaker in people's eyes. But hearing you, it feels like the opposite. It makes you stronger. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his calm presence filling the room. Joe, pain doesn't shrink when you hide it. It grows. But when you share it, it becomes lighter, and it gives others permission to share too. People don't connect to strengths without weakness. They connect to the human behind it. At that moment, Joe was no longer the challenger. He had become a listener, a student. His next words came slowly, carefully. Keanu, can I ask you something personal? What was the hardest moment when you had to stand back up, even when everything in you said you couldn't? The question was heavy, and everyone watching knew it. Keanu closed his eyes for a second, as if reliving a memory he had carried for years. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. There was a time, he said softly, when I lost someone I loved deeply. I felt like the world had stopped. I would wake up in the morning and feel a silence so loud it drowned everything else. I thought I would never heal. I thought life had ended for me too. His voice shook slightly, and Joe's eyes softened in response. The chat filled with hearts and words of support. Viewers who had lost someone of their own felt every syllable. But, Keanu continued, one day I saw a child playing on the street. He fell, scraped his knee, and for a moment he cried. Then, just like that, he stood up again and started laughing, chasing his ball, like nothing happened. I remember thinking, maybe healing is not forgetting. Maybe it is standing again, even when the wound is still there. I realized if a child could rise with such innocence, then maybe I could rise too. That small moment gave me the courage to take another step forward. Joe exhaled, visibly moved. Man, that's powerful. I thought this conversation would be about fighting, discipline, maybe even some fun stories about your movies. But instead, You're giving people lessons about life they will never forget. Keanu smiled faintly, his eyes kind. Stories about movies fade, Joe. But stories about the heart, they stay forever. People don't remember the roles I played as much as they remember the humanity behind them. That is what matters most to me. The studio lights glowed brighter, and the energy in the room felt different now. This wasn't just a podcast anymore. It was a mirror for millions watching. Somewhere, a lonely person felt less alone. Somewhere, someone grieving felt hope. Somewhere, someone ready to give up found a reason to hold on just a little longer. And yet, as deep as this conversation had already gone, Joe wasn't finished. He leaned closer with a look of curiosity, almost challenge again. Keanu, if strength is in silence and kindness, then what happens when kindness fails? What happens when you give to people, and they betray you, or use you, or throw it back in your face? How do you keep being kind when the world feels cruel? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud, and Keanu's answer would not only test his philosophy, but reveal a truth that even Joe himself wasn't ready to face. When kindness is tested, question hung in the air like a blade, sharp and demanding. Joe Rogan's eyes were locked on Keanu, waiting for the answer. Millions of viewers felt the same tension. The chat slowed down, people waiting to see if Keanu's calm voice would break under the weight of a harder truth. Keanu leaned back slightly, his face quiet, but his eyes carried a storm. He let the silence stay for a moment, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he wanted his answer to come from a place of truth, not reaction. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. Joe, kindness is easy when people return it. Kindness is tested when it is rejected, or worse, when it is betrayed. I've been there. I've been kind to people who used me, lied to me, and left me behind. It hurts. It feels unfair. Sometimes, it feels like proof that kindness is weakness. But here is what I learned. When others betray your kindness, it says nothing about you. It only reveals who they are. Joe's face softened, and he tapped the table lightly. But doesn't that make you bitter, man? Like, doesn't it get inside you? Because I think, if someone keeps betraying me, at some point, I stop giving. Keanu's eyes didn't waver. It almost did, Joe. I remember a time when betrayal cut me so deep that I wanted to shut my heart completely. I told myself, no more. I won't trust anyone again. I won't give anything again. I carried that bitterness for months. It made me heavy. It made me cold. And one day, I realized something. The bitterness wasn't protecting me. It was killing me slowly. It was turning me into the very thing I didn't want to be. The studio grew still again. People watching from all over the world leaned closer to their screens, some nodding, some wiping quiet tears. Keanu took a breath and continued. So I chose to forgive, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Forgiveness is not saying what they did was right. Forgiveness is saying, you will not control my heart anymore, and that, Joe, is the most powerful freedom a person can have. Joe rubbed his chin, clearly shaken. Damn, that's heavy. I've always thought forgiveness was for the other person, like letting them off the hook. But the way you're saying it, it's for yourself, isn't it? Keanu nodded gently. Yes, it is not about excusing what they did. It is about freeing yourself from carrying their poison. If you hold on to betrayal, you let them live rent-free in your heart. Forgiveness is how you take your heart back. The chat lit up again with words like needed this. Forgiveness is strength, and this is life-changing. The conversation had shifted from philosophy to survival, and viewers could feel the depth in every word. Joe leaned forward again, his tone more personal now. You know, Keanu, I've always thought of myself as tough. I've trained fighters, I've pushed my body, I've challenged myself in every way. But hearing you talk about betrayal and forgiveness, man, that feels like the hardest fight of all. Because it's not about fists, it's about the heart. Keanu gave a faint smile, his voice calm. The heart fights battles no one else can see, and those battles shape us more than any victory in the ring or on the screen. The question is not if we will be hurt. The question is what we will do with the hurt. Will we turn it into walls, or will we turn it into bridges? The words hit Joe so deeply that he leaned back, his expression almost vulnerable. You know, I thought I was challenging you tonight, but it feels like you're challenging me and maybe everyone watching to rethink what strength means. And honestly, I don't know if I have that kind of strength. Keanu's eyes softened again. Joe, strength is not about having it all figured out. It is about choosing the harder path when the easier one tempts you. Anyone can close their heart, but it takes true strength to keep it open after it has been broken. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to choose not to let pain make you cruel. The chat went wild again. Some viewers admitted they were crying. Others typed out stories of their own betrayals, their struggles to forgive. The moment had become more than an interview. It was a mirror for the audience's own wounds. Joe exhaled and gave a small laugh, not out of humor but out of disbelief at how far the conversation had traveled. Keanu, I asked you about betrayal, and instead you gave people a way to heal. I don't think anyone expected this tonight. Honestly, I didn't expect it. Keanu looked at him with quiet kindness. Life rarely gives us what we expect, Joe. It gives us what we need, even when it hurts. The room fell into silence again, the kind of silence that feels alive, like the whole world is breathing at the same time. And in that silence, Joe's next question began to form, one that would take the conversation into an even more dangerous territory, because it wasn't about grief, or betrayal, or forgiveness. It was about fear. The shadow of fear. Joe Rogan leaned forward, his eyes sharper now, as if he was about to open a door that most people keep locked. The audience could feel it too, and the chat slowed again, the flood of words replaced by short bursts of tension. Joe's voice dropped, calm but serious. Keanu, we've talked about grief, about betrayal, about forgiveness. But let me ask you this. What are you afraid of? I don't mean movie stunts or physical danger. I mean the fear that follows you when no one else is around. The one you can't escape. The question hit hard. Keanu's face shifted slightly, his usual calmness shadowed by thought. He lowered his gaze for a moment, and the silence that followed seemed heavier than any words. People watching could almost hear their own fears echoing in the quiet. Finally, he raised his eyes and spoke, his voice low and steady. Joe, I am not afraid of pain. I am not afraid of death. I have seen both many times in my life. What I fear most is becoming numb. I fear waking up one day and realizing that nothing moves me anymore. No joy, no sadness, no love, only emptiness. The audience froze. The chat erupted with people admitting they felt the same, confessing they too feared losing their ability to feel. Joe blinked, almost caught off guard. Numbness. Wow, I never thought of that as a fear. Most people are afraid of the pain itself, but you're afraid of losing the ability to feel it. Keanu nodded. Yes, pain hurts, but it reminds you that you are alive. Joy heals, but it also reminds you of what matters. Numbness is dangerous because it pretends to protect you, but it steals life from you piece by piece. I've seen people hide inside it, and they stop living long before their bodies stop breathing. Joe leaned back in his chair, silent for a moment. The weight of the answer pressed on him. So what do you do when that numbness tries to take over? Because I think everyone watching has felt that at some point. The emptiness, the void. How do you fight it? Keanu's eyes grew thoughtful. You fight numbness by choosing to feel, even when it hurts. When my life felt empty, I forced myself to notice the small things. The warmth of sunlight on my face, the laughter of a stranger, the smell of food cooking in a tiny restaurant. Those small things became anchors, that reminded me the world was still alive, and I was still part of it. Numbness wants you to stop noticing, so the way to fight it is to notice everything, even the pain. The chat filled with thousands of messages again. This is gold. I feel this. Thank you, Keanu. People were typing their own stories, some confessing they had been living in numbness for years, and his words gave them a spark of hope. Joe's face softened. Man, that's deep. I've always thought of fear as something to conquer. Like if you're afraid of heights, climb higher. If you're afraid of fighting, step into the ring. But what you're describing, that's not about conquering. That's about staying human. Keanu smiled faintly. Exactly. Fear is not always an enemy. Sometimes it is a reminder. My fear of numbness reminds me to keep feeling, to keep noticing, to keep loving. Fear can guide you, if you listen to what it is truly saying. Joe nodded slowly, as if something inside him had shifted. You know, Keanu, I thought I was bringing you here to test you, to see how you'd respond to tough questions. But the truth is, you're teaching me things I didn't expect, and maybe teaching everyone watching too. Keanu tilted his head slightly, his calm presence unshaken. Life is not about teaching, Joe. It's about sharing. I share my fears, and maybe it makes someone else feel less alone. And when they share theirs, I feel less alone too. Connection is what keeps us alive. Without it, fear wins. The audience was glued to the moment. Somewhere, in living rooms, in bedrooms across the world, people sat with tears in their eyes, nodding at words that reached places they had never spoken out loud. But Joe wasn't done. He leaned forward again, his tone carrying both respect and challenge. Keanu, you've faced grief, betrayal, and fear. You've shared wisdom that most people would keep buried. But I want to ask you something even bigger. If tomorrow was your last day on Earth, what would you want people to remember you for? Not your movies, not your fame, but your life. What would your legacy be? The question landed with the force of finality. The air in the studio felt charged, as if everyone knew that the next words could be the most important of the entire conversation. The question of Legusai's room grew heavier as Joe's question hung between them. If tomorrow was your last day, what would you want people to remember you for? It was not a question about films, fame, or success. It was about the deepest truth of life. Keanu Reeves lowered his gaze, his hands resting quietly on his knees. The silence stretched long enough that the audience leaned forward in anticipation. It felt like time slowed down. Millions of viewers around the world held their breath, waiting for an answer that would not just describe his life, but reveal his soul. Finally, he lifted his head, his voice calm but steady, carrying the weight of years. Joe, I don't want to be remembered for the roles I played. I don't want to be remembered for red carpets or awards. If people remember me at all, I want them to say one simple thing. He made life a little lighter for those around him. That is enough. The chat exploded instantly. Thousands of messages appeared. Wow, this is beautiful. Tears in my eyes. Some people even typed, this is the legacy I want to. Joe blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity. That's it, just making life lighter. Keanu smiled softly. Yes, because in the end, none of us take trophies with us. None of us take money or fame. We only leave behind the way we made people feel. If I can help someone carry their burden for even a moment, if I can bring kindness where there was pain, then that is a legacy that matters. It does not need statues or headlines. It lives in the quiet corners of people's hearts. The words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples across the audience. Joe leaned back in his chair, thinking hard. You know, I ask fighters about legacy all the time. They talk about titles, records, wins. But what you just said, man, that feels bigger than all of it. Keanu's eyes softened, because titles fade, Joe. Records are broken, but kindness echoes. Sometimes, The smallest act you do for someone becomes the thing they remember for the rest of their life, and you may never even know it. That is why it matters so much. Joe looked down at the table, his face thoughtful. I've lived a lot of my life chasing goals, wanting to be the best, the biggest, the one remembered. But you're making me wonder, maybe the real question isn't how long people remember you. Maybe it's how deeply you touched them while you were here. Keanu nodded. Exactly. Life is short, Joe. Too short to live for applause. But it is long enough to give love, and that love outlives us. I have lost people I loved, but their kindness still walks with me every day. That is their legacy, living inside me. And one day, I hope mine does the same for someone else. The chat filled with people sharing stories about those they had lost, about the lessons they still carried from them. The conversation had gone far beyond an interview. It had become a shared human moment across millions of screens. Joe sat quietly for a long moment, then asked softly, "But Keanu, doesn't it scare you sometimes? To think that one day, all of this, your work, your name, your face will fade. Doesn't the thought of being forgotten ever haunt you?" Keanu's face grew calm, almost peaceful. "No, Joe, because being forgotten is not the same as being meaningless. You see, even if no one remembers my name, the kindness I shared may live on in the people who pass it forward. That is enough for me. I don't need immortality in history. I just want eternity in someone's heart." The studio was silent again. Joe's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. For once, the man known for endless questions sat speechless, moved beyond conversation, and in that silence, millions of viewers found themselves reflecting on their own lives. What legacy were they building? Were they chasing applause that would fade, or were they planting seeds of kindness that would live on long after? But just as the room felt settled, Joe leaned forward again, his voice lower, almost uncertain. "Keanu, I need to ask you one more thing. You've given me wisdom about grief, betrayal, fear, and legacy. But tell me this, when the world gets dark, when everything feels heavy, who carries you? Who do you lean on when you can't stand alone?" The question struck like thunder. For the first time, Keanu's face showed surprise. His calm eyes blinked, and the air in the studio tightened. It was a question that would strip away the last layer of his strength and reveal the truth he rarely shared with anyone. Who carries the strong? Joe's question stayed in the air like thunder that refused to fade. When the world gets dark, when everything feels heavy, who carries you? The audience froze. Millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens. Keanu Reeves had spoken of resilience, forgiveness, and legacy, but this question pierced straight into his own hidden weakness. Keanu's single quotes asked, calm, face shifted, his eyes lowering for a moment. For the first time that night, he looked unsure. The silence felt alive, stretching until even Joe wondered if he had asked too much. Finally, Keanu raised his head, his voice soft, almost breaking. "Joe, the truth is, I have walked through long roads alone. There were times when I felt like no one could carry me, when the weight of grief and silence was mine alone to hold. But even then, there were small hands of grace that lifted me, sometimes people, sometimes moments, sometimes strangers who had no idea how much they gave me." Joe leaned forward, his voice gentle now. "Tell me about one of those moments. Tell me about one time when someone carried you." Keanu took a long breath, his eyes distant, as if traveling back in time. "There was a night," he said, "when I was sitting on a park bench, feeling like the world had emptied itself around me. I had lost people I loved, and I felt hollow. Then an old man sat beside me. He didn't know me, he didn't ask questions. He didn't even recognize my face. He just sat there, silent, watching the stars. After a long time, he turned to me and said, 'The night feels heavy, but remember, stars are born out of darkness.' Then he stood up and walked away. That stranger carried me that night. He gave me hope without even knowing it. The chat filled with silence emojis, hearts, and words like wow, goosebumps, tears. Joe swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on Keanu. So sometimes, strangers carried you. Keanu nodded. Yes. And sometimes friends too. Once, I was filming a movie, and the days were long. I felt empty, like I couldn't keep going. Then one of the crew members, a man who worked behind the scenes, quietly brought me a cup of coffee every morning without saying a word. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't expect thanks. He just showed up, steady, day after day. That small kindness carried me more than he will ever know. Sometimes it is not the grand gestures that save us, it's the quiet ones. Joe's voice trembled slightly. That hits me hard. Because I think people watching right now forget that even the strongest, even the most admired, need someone to carry them sometimes. Keanu's eyes softened, and he gave a faint smile. Yes, Joe. No one walks alone forever. Even if we think we are alone, the universe places people in our path, sometimes for a moment, sometimes for a lifetime. They become bridges when we feel we are sinking. I believe that His grace it is not earned, it is given. The audience was moved beyond words. People in the chat began sharing stories of strangers who had once carried them through dark nights, reminding each other that humanity's quiet strength lies in connection. Joe exhaled deeply, his expression raw. You know, Keanu, when I started this conversation, I thought I was testing you. I thought I was pushing you into a challenge that would make good television. But sitting here, I feel like you've carried me tonight. I feel like you've carried everyone watching. Keanu looked at him with quiet kindness. We carry each other, Joe, sometimes without knowing it. Sometimes without even seeing the weight the other person is holding. That is the beauty of being human. We are not built to stand alone. Even in silence, even in small moments, we carry and are carried. The studio lights seemed softer now, almost gentle, as if reflecting the weight of the moment. Viewers around, the world felt connected in a way that no ordinary interview could create. But Joe, still searching for the final thread, leaned forward one last time. Keanu, you've given us truths about grief, betrayal, fear, legacy, and being carried. But let me ask you the hardest question of all, the one only you can answer. After everything you've faced, after all the storms you've walked through, what is the single greatest lesson life has taught you? The question was like the final piece of a puzzle, and everyone watching knew that the next words would not just be an answer, they would be a truth that could echo far beyond the studio. The greatest lesson. The studio was silent. Joe Rogan's question echoed in the air. What is the single greatest lesson life has taught you? The cameras caught Keanu Reeves sitting still, his eyes lowered, his face calm but heavy with thought. The audience leaned forward, the chat slowed to almost nothing. Millions of people waiting for words that might define everything that had been shared so far. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. He breathed in deeply, as if gathering not only memories, but pieces of his soul. When he opened his eyes, there was no hesitation. His voice was soft, steady, but it carried a weight that pressed into the hearts of everyone listening. The greatest lesson life has taught me, Joe, is this: love is the only thing that lasts. Everything else fades. Pain fades, joy fades, fame fades, even life itself fades. But love, the love you give, the love you receive, it continues. It lives in people long after you are gone. It is the one thing stronger than death, stronger than fear, stronger than time. The words struck like lightning in silence. The chat exploded with hearts, tears, and messages like "This is truth. I needed this, and love is everything." Joe sat still, visibly moved. His usual tough posture softened, his voice trembling slightly. Love, I don't think I've ever heard it said so simple, yet so powerful. People talk about success, about power, about making history. But you're saying none of that matters compared to love? Keanu nodded gently. Yes, because when you are at the end of your road, you will not ask for your trophies or your money. You will remember the people you loved and the people who loved you. You will remember the moments of kindness, the laughter shared, the hands that held you when you were breaking. That is the true wealth of life. That is what gives meaning to all the pain, all the struggle. Without love, everything else is empty. Joe leaned back, silent for a moment, his eyes wet but steady. Man, I don't even know what to say. I thought this would be another podcast, another conversation. But this feels like something bigger. It feels like something people will remember for years. Keanu gave a faint smile. Not because of me, Joe, but because people recognize the truth when they hear it. The truth does not belong to one person, belongs to all of us. We all know, deep inside, that love is the only thing that matters. Sometimes we just need to be reminded. The chat erupted again. Viewers from around the world began typing stories of love, lost love, found love, family, friends, even strangers who had shown them kindness. The interview had become more than entertainment. It had become a shared human moment, a reminder that beneath all differences, all fears, and all struggles, people are united by the same desire to love and to be loved. Joe leaned forward, one last time, his voice soft, almost reverent. Keanu, I have to tell you this. I've had legends sit in that chair. I've heard amazing stories. But tonight, you didn't just answer my questions, you gave the world something it didn't know. It was waiting for. This conversation will live far beyond this studio. Keanu bowed his head slightly, humility in his eyes. Thank you, Joe. But remember, it is not about me. It is about all of us carrying each other, forgiving, facing our fears, leaving behind kindness, and never forgetting that love is what keeps us alive. If even one person watching tonight decides to be kinder, to forgive, to hold on to love instead of bitterness, then this moment was worth it. The studio lights glowed warmly, and the moment felt timeless. It was no longer an interview. It was no longer entertainment. It was a story that would ripple across millions of hearts, carried forward in whispers, in actions, in choices made long after the cameras stopped rolling. Joe exhaled deeply, his voice almost breaking. Keanu, respect. Nothing but respect. Keanu smiled softly. Respect, Joe, and love. Always love. And with those words, the conversation ended. But in the silence that followed, millions of people sat staring at their screens, feeling something they hadn't felt in a long time, hope. And as clips spread, as people replayed the words again and again, the moment became more than viral. It became a lesson, a light, a reminder that even in the darkest times, love is the one thing that never fades.